The Mediterranean island of Corsica will be the start of the 100th Tour de France later this summer. But today it's the scene for a micro version of the tour known as Criterium International, with many of the tour contenders set to go head-to-head. This is the Epic Cycle Series presented by Michelob Ultra, the 82nd edition of Criterium International. And today it is the third and final stage on the island of Corsica, just over 109 miles. I'm Steve Schlanger alongside Bob Roll. Bob, it's a race with a lot of history and really just a mini version of the Tour de France.
As you said, it's a dress rehearsal for the Tour de France, which will transpire just over 3 months from now. And it will be the 100th edition of the great race, but the island of Corsica, the grander part of this year's Tour de France, a mini Tour de France, like you said, one flat stage, one individual time trial, and one mountain stage to finish off the stage race.
169 miles altogether in the 2 days of racing. Jens Voigt has won this race 5 times. He's back for more this year. And in stage 1 yesterday, it was a short 89-kilometer road stage that was really all expected to come down to a field sprint, starting in Porto Vecchio, ending in the same town. Although there's an undulating nature to the course, it was so short and so flat near the finish that everybody knew the sprinters were going to make a statement.
We'll take a close look at these roads, very narrow, very twisting throughout the island of Corsica. That's a great preview for later on this summer in the Tour de France.
And that big red banner indicating the 1 kilometer to go mark. And this is where the sprinters teams were setting things up. And the team in the black and blue out front setting it up for the Dutch sprinter Theo Bos, leading it out from a long way, holding his top end speed. He would get the stage win just ahead of Nasser Bouhanni and Jonathan Cantwell.
Jonathan Cantwell throwing a quick flick into Nasser Bouhanni. You can see the man in red, white, and blue just in the middle of the screen, barely avoiding Cantwell, but both of them just watching the fireworks from Theo Bos. Theo Bos, a great lead out by Graham Brown on the Blanco team, formerly Rabobank, and another solid stage win. Blanco has had a great start to 2013.
Their 11th win already this season. Bos winning the sprint on stage 1 and taking the yellow jersey as the first overall leader. That's his 4th win of this season. And then on stage 2, later that same day, it was an individual time trial just 7 kilometers long. Last year, this race was won by Cadel Evans, so he was one of the favorites coming in. But his teammate, TJ Van Garderen of BMC, set a terrific time early on.
Setting the standard here in Corsica, TJ Van Garderen, a big star of American cycling, just under 9 minutes and 12 seconds. A great time by TJ.
An outstanding start to the season by the American, recently coming off a top 5 at Paris-Nice. And then it would be the 26-year-old Italian, Manuele Boaro of Saxo Bank. And he would finish just 1 second faster than Van Garderen with a time of 9:10.
Setting the standard, Boaro, a time trialing specialist from Italy.
But then Richie Porte, off the biggest win of his entire career a couple of weeks ago at Paris-Nice, in the time trial, one of his specialties, catching the man who started a minute ahead of him to set the new best time that would be a race-winning time.
Exceptional effort by Richie Porte, another time trialing specialist, comes from a triathlon background, and he was instrumental in helping Bradley Wiggins win the Tour de France last summer, but having a chance to shine this season so far. He's already won Paris-Nice, puts himself in a great position to win Criterium International as well after the time trial.
But some marquee names close behind. Chris Froome in 4th, American Andrew Talansky 5th, both within 7 seconds of the overall race lead going to stage 3, where Richie Porte will be the leader. But it's a big climb on the final stage. Porte's going to be a factor, so will his teammate Chris Froome and the Americans, Van Garderen and Talansky. They're all in play for the final stage of Criterium International. The Epic Cycle, presented by Michelob Ultra on NBC Sports Network, is brought to you by Michelob Ultra. This is the year you stop saying, this is the year. And by Strava. built for cyclists. And by BMC Switzerland, manufacturers of the Gran Fondo GF01, the ultimate spring classics bike. See more at www.bmc-switzerland.com. The island of Corsica, made up of a series of volcanoes in the Mediterranean Sea, and actually closer to Italy than mainland France. However, it is one of 26 regions of France as it is known, and this is the map as Stage 3 traverses the southern tip of the island.
6 climbs and a very tough finishing climb, the Col dell'Ospedale. Twisting roads, 3 sprints out on the race course that also have time bonuses, and there is a 10-second time bonus for the winner at the finish line, and because after the time trial times are so close, that could play a big part in today's stage.
And this was just a moment ago, a 3-man breakaway. Francis Moret, Thomas Vogler, and Matthias Franck getting caught by the field led by Team Sky. The team of overall race leader in the yellow jersey, Richie Porte, just inside of 16K from the finish and just about at the base of this last climb.
That's Vasily Kirienka, the rider from Sky, teammates with the race leader, and Chris Froome, second wheel there, sweeping up to the breakaway. This is the bottom of the last climb, all to play for now in Criterium International.
This climb, 14 kilometers long, averaging 6%. The steepest part comes with 2K left to go to the top.
There is Richie Porte, winner of the time trial and current leader. He's got 2 solid teammates still in the front here. They've done a lot of work throughout the day. And there is Chris Froome, the man who was second to Bradley Wiggins in last year's Tour de France.
So Team Sky at the front, right behind them, BMC. And there is the defending champion of Criterium International, Cadel Evans. He did not have a good time trial this year, however. That man, American TJ Van Garderen, wearing the white jersey. He's the best young rider in the race. Just 1 second off the race lead of Richie Porte. Certainly will be a factor for the overall, and he sits just a couple of places behind Porte now, near the front of the field.
Taking a look at the last climb here where the peloton is. They've done the red road, the green road yet to come, and a very steep, tough climb to the finish. Almost 11% gradient with 1.5 kilometers to go in this climb. So this climb starts out gradually, but keeps getting steeper and steeper and more difficult towards the end.
Right behind the BMC riders who are in the red and black, there's a blue and red jersey belonging to American Andrew Talansky. He's just 7 seconds behind Porte. So we have a lot of big-name riders, certainly with the ability to win on this climb and take the overall race as a result.
Cadel Evans there taking a look at his teammate, TJ Van Garderen. The first time this year they've had a chance to race together. Cadel had a terrible time trial, 74th in one of his specialties, the time trial. So he has decided he will help TJ Van Garderen try to win Criterium International overall this year, which Cadel did last year.
And this will be the only race prior to the Tour de France that Van Garderen and Evans raced together. Cadel Evans saying that he will be the designated team leader at the Tour for BMC, as American Andrew Talansky here in the blue rides up right behind Evans.
Talansky a bit isolated there. You don't see any of his teammates from Garmin up near the front. He's getting used to that. It happened consistently throughout Paris-Nice. Great chance to win Paris-Nice a couple of weeks ago, and he did a fantastic ride, winning a stage there and finishing second overall. On
the big climb at the Montagne de l'Ur in Paris-Nice, Talansky attacked 3 times. The first 2 worked in his favor. The third time put him in such a bad spot that he was eventually passed by Richie Porte, and that was the decisive stage that allowed Porte to win the overall race.
Here's the damage at the back of the field. Riders getting shelled on a regular basis now. Every time Sky goes to the front, Kirienka still doing the tempo. Raindrops also, that could play a factor physiologically as we get towards the finish line and we get higher up this mountain. It'll get colder and colder. Been an absolutely miserable spring so far in Europe this year.
Other riders like Michael Rodriguez here having trouble staying in contact with just over a dozen kilometers left to go in the rain. The weather this spring in Europe has really been a factor with a lot of races and not even 60 degrees as these riders roll along on this very protracted, grinding climb, the 6th climb of the day.
Kirienka leading still. Chris Froome looking very solid there, second wheel, but Richie Porte, the race leader overnight after a great performance in the time trial, sits third wheel. Can see a long line of suffering riders there. Team Sky dominant. They bring another superstar squad here to Criterium International. They seem to dominate the stage races year in, year out all over Europe.
Ben Hermans, the 26-year-old Belgian for Radio Shack, 5th at the Tour Down Under this year, is getting dropped off the back. So what about the strategic approach by all these heavy hitters at the front? The breakaway's been caught, Bob. This is the very front of the race, and they still have over 11.5 kilometers left to go.
Well, it's an incredible roster that Team Sky can bring to all the stage races. Here we see Vasily Kirienka, second in Criterium International just a couple of years ago. If he was on another team, he'd probably be the race leader. They'd be working for him. But Kirienka on Team Sky now, they have both Chris Froome and Richie Porte who are capable of winning this race for Team Sky. This is a great card to play. Kirienka on the front, Porte and Froome can sit on his wheel and rest, and that's a bit of a factor here on the lower slopes of the Col de Ospedale. Pretty gradual now and very high speeds as we get into the last 11 kilometers of the bike race.
Last year at the Tour de France, Chris Froome in many cases was a better climber than Bradley Wiggins, although he rode for Wiggins in terms of the overall general classification. Froome now riding for Richie Porte here because he's the leader coming into this final day of Criterium International, but Froome's just 2 seconds back, so how do they play that dynamic?
Well, theoretically, they would race for the man in the leader's jersey. There are time bonuses, 10 seconds, 6 seconds, and 4 seconds. So that gap in GC, only 2 seconds, they could overcome that theoretically if Chris Froome wins the stage. So what you want to do is eliminate your rivals if you're Team Sky, and we'll see how that plays out in the rest of the stage.
Well, check this out. Cadel Evans, number 1 as the defending champion, has been dropped. He's not been racing all that well this season. He said he was going to come to Criterium International specifically to help TJ Van Garderen, but he's not able to even help him at this point because he's out of the picture.
Tour de France winner in 2011. One of the few bright spots for Cadel last year was this race, Criterium International. He won that. He went on to finish 6th in the Tour de France, but not having anything like his race last year in the Criterium International. Dropped already with 10 kilometers to go in the stage.
One less helper for TJ Van Garderen on this deciding final climb at Criterium International. Sunday, May 12th, the Epic Cycle Series presented by Michelob Ultra continues with the Amgen Tour of California, where last year saw the final stage run through downtown Los Angeles. It's the Amgen Tour of California, Sunday, May 12th on the NBC Sports Network. Team Sky still at the front. Just over 10 kilometers left to go, all uphill, and in the white jersey, best young rider is the American TJ Van Garderen, who will be one of the favorites at the Amgen Tour of California. He is right behind Criterium International leader in the yellow jersey, Richie Porte, glued to his wheel at this point. Van Garderen just 1 second behind Porte coming into this final stage.
Van Garderen perfectly placed there for the rest of this stage, right on the wheel of the race leader. The white jersey of best young rider, he won that prize in last year's Tour de France, 5th overall. And he has a great chance to win this race and the Tour of California. He's been very close in his career so far, but he's still looking for that one big win to set his career on the right track.
Manuel Boraro, who had a good time trial, sitting now 1 second back on the GC. He is having trouble here at the back of the field.
That is a tough place to be, very tough. Just dangling there, yo-yoing on and off the back of the last wheel in the front group. Boraro trying to hang tough here in the finale.
So he's at the back, Team Sky at the front with Chris Froome, who was second overall at the Tour de France last year, has 4 wins this year so far. And Froome, the subject of today's Athlete Profile presented by Michelob Ultra.
Look at Chris Froome. Chris Froome is trying to spoil the party as it's Chris Froome who's riding away for Sky.
I was born in Nairobi in Kenya. Lived there for the first 14 years of my life, and when I was down there I was always on my bike. It was never training as such, it was never for competition. It was, to me, it was my freedom. There was this area not far from home called the Great Rift Valley, where I just used to love riding my bike down this escarpment road and spending all day climbing back up. It was only when I went to South Africa as a teenager to go to school that I saw that cycling was actually a bit more of a bigger sport, and that there were actually races to go to. 2 years ago at the Vuelta a España, I saw for the first time that I was able to put 3 weeks of racing back to back and to be able to come second in the general classification there. Up until then, I'd known that I was good, but I'd never realistically thought I could be on a podium of the Tour de France.
And look at Froome now, who's really hammering it. He's attacking him.
I'd had my training, my preparation up to there had been perfect.
Chris Froome, now in his dying moments, is lifting the pace until he can do no more. Wiggins is waiting on his rear wheel.
My job for the race was to look after Bradley in the mountains, and I think by doing that, it sort of kept me in that front group and showed me, hey, it's not actually too hard to ride here. Maybe I can kind of hang on a bit longer in this front group. We went into it as a team with one goal, which was to win the Tour with Brad. And if anything had to happen to him, then yes, I would have been in a perfect position to take over. And I think we came away with exactly the result we wanted from that.
This is unbelievable for Africa. This is unbelievable for Kenya. Chris Froome creating a bit of a surprise here this afternoon. Gets the win, Phil.
Froome crosses the line, a tremendous show of strength. What a battle of the favourites that was.
It's going to be a really hard tour this year. It's going to be an all-rounded rider who's going to win that. And with the backing of a really strong team, I think I stand a really good chance.
The 27-year-old is coming off a second-place finish recently at Tirreno Adriatico. He won the Tour of Oman earlier this year in his first race, and now this Criterium International is his first event as an engaged man. He's getting married soon.
Getting married, well, we'll see what that does to his morale. Maybe it won't help that much. But Chris Froome, it's been said now, the rhetoric from Team Sky, he is going to be the man they work for at the Tour de France. He's going to have a great chance to look at the first three stages. They will be right here in Corsica. They did change a little bit last year. They said they were going to work for yellow and green. Well, they left Mark Cavendish out of the equation in Team Sky in the Tour de France last year. And, of course, Cavendish has now changed teams. He'll be on the Belgian Omega team when we get to the Tour de France later this summer.
Criterium International has been held in various parts of France in its 8 decades of existence, but being held in Corsica since 2010, and specifically this year to help as a precursor for the start of the 100th anniversary of the Tour de France in July. Give the riders a chance to preview some of the roads they'll hit when the biggest race in the world comes to this island midsummer.
Well, 12,000 inhabitants in Porto Vecchio, where this stage started today. That swells to 100,000 during the tourist season later on in the summer. And when the Tour de France arrives, that number might go upwards towards 1 million people on the island of Corsica. Let's hope that the locals are ready.
I mentioned before it's designated as a region of France, and the reason it's starting the 100th anniversary edition of the Tour in Corsica this summer is because this is the only region that the Tour de France has never visited in its 99 years.
100th edition. It's going to be a thrill to be back here in July to watch the Grand Boucle, the Tour de France, start here. 3 stages, and then we go over to the mainland for a team time trial in Nice. Team Sky, one of the best team time trial squads in the world. That should help their overall fortunes in this summer's Tour de France. But so far, it's Vasily Kirienka, raced for Movistar last year, the Spanish team, and he's been hired by Team Sky. They do have a pretty big budget, and so Kirienka might be a big addition to that team squad in the Tour de France this summer.
Now, Bob Jungels, the 20-year-old Luxembourger for Radio Shack, hanging on at the back here as we're under 8K left to go, but it's all uphill on this final stage at Criterium International. Stage 3 of Criterium International, down to the final 7 kilometers on the Col d'Ospedale. And Team Sky still at the front. Overall race leader Richie Porte in the yellow jersey, but just ahead of him, Chris Froome, who sits just 2 seconds behind him on the general classification. Bob, it's a very intriguing situation because on balance, Froome is a better climber than Porte. And now we have a rider coming up the side from IAM making a small move here. Johann Schopp, the 30-year-old from Switzerland.
Winner of last year's Tour of Utah, putting in an attack here. This plays in perfectly to what you were just asking. What you were talking about here is Team Sky. What's the strategy? Drill it just as hard as you can with Vasily Kirienko for as long as you can. And then as the attacks come from the other riders in the top 10, see if Chris Froome or Richie Porte can manage those attacks. Chris Froome in a perfect position, just 2 seconds behind the race lead, and on almost equal time with the third-place rider, TJ Van Garderen from the United States. Bob Jungels in trouble here. One of the last men in the front group to get dropped. He's already won a race this year, just 20 years old, heir apparent to the throne of Luxembourg cycling of the Schleck brothers. By the way, Andy Schleck having a pretty solid Criterium International in the breakaway earlier today. He's been dropped already, but that's a lot better than he's been doing recently in cycling.
Now, if he can finish the race, it'd be a big accomplishment
Exactly.
the way things have been going with him. So Schupp off the front, a guy who has a cyclocross and a mountain bike background. He won the mountains classification at Paris-Nice this year, as well as finished in the top 10 at the Tour of Oman. So he's climbing well, he's riding well early in the season, and just dangling off the front here, not getting a huge gap, but trying to stretch it as much as possible.
6.3 kilometers to the finish. Still a pretty big group here. Thomas Vogler in the green jersey there, number 81. Spent most of the day in the breakaway and got some sprint points and King of the Mountain points. He is still hanging tough. That's a pretty good ride by Vogler. We'll see how that plays out in the last few miles of the bike race. Team Sky still in full control. Kirienka doing a great job. But that's a pretty wicked acceleration by Johan Chalp here now, trying to grind his way up to the finish line. Now Kirienka's dropped off. Chris Froome comes to the front.
So now the top two general classification riders for Sky have moved to the front. Froome leading Port. Behind them, it's TJ Van Garderen. Andrew Talansky up there for Garmin Sharp. Kirienka right here is going to drop back.
That's the maximum capability of Kirienka, but that's a decent ride. Chris Froome not putting in an acceleration, just keeping the tempo strong. No danger in Chope just a few seconds up the road. So Richie Port still in a good position to win Criterium International. There are time bonuses on the line, though.
And Chope with another acceleration here. Are you surprised there's not more of a reaction from the group behind Chope?
Well, Chope a little bit dangerous. Starts the stage 38 seconds behind the race leader, Richie Port. If he is joined by some of the other riders in the top 10, like Jean-Christophe Perrault from the AG2R squad, then he becomes a lot more dangerous. Seems to be well under control from that man. Chris Froome on the front, but for Johan Chope and his teammates from IAM Cycling, trying to get an invite at the Tour de France this year, and that's a great acceleration within 6 kilometers of the finish line. 5.8 Ks to go.
This is one of those long, grinding climbs, 14 kilometers altogether, where oftentimes you don't see big accelerations and a series of attacks throughout the climb. Riders will wait until the final couple of kilometers to make the decisive moves. His lead at 12 seconds, and he looks over his shoulder. He can see the riders behind him.
Gap going up a little bit there, and he has a 10-second bonus at the finish line, looking a little bit more dangerous. And look at this acceleration by Chris Froome on the front, putting the lead group into all kinds of difficulty. That looks like Maxime Monfort coming unglued at the back.
And Monfort, the Radio Shack rider, 6th here at the Criterium International last year. He's won a stage of the Vuelta a España before. 30-year-old Belgian. Top 5 at the Tour of the Mediterranean earlier this season as well.
I tell you, we've seen Chris Froome do the exact same thing for a man in the yellow jersey a number of times. That was for Bradley Wiggins in last year's Tour de France. And it seemed as if Chris Froome, once he went to the front to do his work, it actually gave him an extra boost of energy and was able to put the field in trouble in the Tour last summer. He's doing exactly the same thing here on this climb to the finish, the Col de Ospedale. Great riding by Chris Froome. Look at the power of that man.
Now Froome creating a gap between even his team leader, Richie Port, as he looks over his shoulder here, and now Froome's riding away from the race leader who's on his own team.
Incredible effort here by Chris Froome. Richie Port just watched him vanish into the distance. We'll see if anybody else can close the gap down. But Chris Froome now almost 5 kilometers to the finish line, just over 3 miles to the finish. And this is an incredible effort by Chris Froome. He's got to be one of the best climbers in cycling at the moment.
How often do we see this? A support rider, theoretically, riding away from his team leader who's leading the overall race. But that's what Froome is doing to Port. Now he's coming up to Schaub at the head of the stage right now.
Getting onto his wheel, looks like J.C. Perrault, the rider from AG2R. See if he can match Chris Froome. Perrault starting the stage 10th in the top 10 overall. Looks like Chope able to match that acceleration. Chris Froome drilling it at the front now. There's the race leader, Richie Port, on the right-hand side of the road, and he cannot follow that acceleration by his own teammate, Chris Froome.
Jean-Christophe Perrault just 7 seconds behind that man in yellow, Richie Port, as the day started. But right now, his biggest concern is Port's teammate, Chris Froome. The best climber of these three. You see the conversation taking place with Perrault and Froome.
Perot starting the stage 5 seconds behind on GC of Chris Froome. Froome asking him if he's going to work. Perot's perhaps saying, no, I'm not. So Chris Froome saying, goodbye, I'll be attacking you right now then.
Well, Froome had pulled over and he slowed up, and then they had the conversation, and clearly Perot must have said he didn't have the legs because Froome immediately hit the accelerator, and he's still going here. He's trying to drop these two, and he's been successful at it because we're just under 5K to go, and Froome is disappearing around the corner.
Perot rolling the shoulders now, looking at the street, watching Chris Froome. If he could get his eyes off the road just in front of him, he'd see this man from Sky, second in last year's Tour de France, dancing on the pedals and pedaling away from the best riders in the world right now. Great effort by Chris Froome. 4.7 kilometers to go to the finish line, alone in the lead.
Chris Froome showing some great form ahead of leading Sky at the Tour de France this summer. Everybody else, his main contenders, getting a little taste, a preview of what may be coming this July. Saturday, April 13th, Formula One racing continues on the NBC Sports Network with one of the most demanding circuits on the 2013 calendar. Don't miss the UBS Chinese Grand Prix, Saturday, April 13th on the NBC Sports Network. Chris Froome at the front of the race, a gap of 22 seconds on his teammate, the race leader, Richie Porte. Bob, do you anticipate this being some kind of an issue within the team? Is it bad form at all?
Well, when you're the race leader, theoretically, your team leader has gotten that distinction. But on Team Sky, they're so strong that they have a number of men to play. Richie Porte got the better of Froome in the time trial, but Froome is definitely getting the better on this climb. Chris Froome, just in that last kilometer, put another 10 seconds into this group, the main contenders in the field. Andreas Kloden from Radio Shack there leading, but this is a group in disarray. There's TJ Van Gardering putting in an attack. 4 kilometers to go, just over 2 miles. It should be about 12 minutes of racing before we get to the finish line.
Richie Porte behind Van Garderen, and then the man in the blue is American Andrew Talansky. They are without teammates. They are on their own with 2.5 miles left to the finish. Everyone trying to catch Chris Froome.
Chris Froome does have a teammate. That's the race leader, Richie Porte. Now, so the tactics change a little bit for Sky. Richie Porte in a very good position. He just needs to follow the accelerations from the rivals of the other teams. And if they catch up to Froome, well, Richie Porte can still move forward. He doesn't have to do any work throughout the rest of the stage.
Jean-Christophe Perot, number 41, second on the road. A 35-year-old Frenchman who was on the podium recently at Paris-Nice, finishing in third. But he is struggling to maintain the pace on the climb. These other top GC contenders falling back even further, now 25 seconds behind Froome, who is accelerating up this climb. He's about 2 kilometers away from the steepest part of the climb, but he's also approaching the finish.
The gap going up now. You can see a little bit of hesitation now. TJ Van Garderen looking over his shoulder to see what Richie Porte is up to. Andrew Talansky in the blue jersey. They do not want to attack each other. They maybe just don't have the energy to do so. Blanco rider on the right-hand side of the road going up there. That must be Bauke Mollema trying to close the gap down, but now it's at 30 seconds. Every turn of the pedal, Chris Froome putting in an incredible effort, getting a bigger advantage. Every time he presses down, attacks the pedals, he gets time on the rivals behind him. 32 seconds now is the gap, and we're getting closer enough to the finish line where nobody will be able to catch him. And look at the face on Jean-Christophe Perot. He is in all kinds of agony trying to stay within sight of Chris Froome, who is vanishing up this mountain.
Richie Porte, TJ Van Garderen back here in this group. Bauke Mollema of Blanco trying to escape that group, but nobody right now within a half minute of Chris Froome. What a ride he is putting in. Last year, top 5 at the Vuelta. The Criterium du Dauphiné, was on the podium in the Olympic Games, finishing third and winning a bronze in the time trial. And now, at the 3K mark left to go, these riders really struggling. That's just under 2 miles to the finish.
Bauke Mollema there, good attack. You can see Mollema putting his rivals in trouble. He finished 10th in the time trial. Looking to move up now. Richie Porte won't do any work with those men because his teammate, this man, Chris Froome, is up the road and flying towards the finish line. If this is a portent for the Tour de France to come later on these roads, that man has got to be the odds-on favorite to win the Tour de France this year.
Well, he started splendidly This season, he's already won a stage at the Tour of Oman, won the points classification and the overall in the Middle East, won a stage of Tirreno Adriatico, finished second overall. But his big goal isn't until midsummer, yet he's still riding so well early in the season and obviously showing his climbing legs today.
Here's an attack now by the Europe car rider.
That's Davide Malacarne, the 25-year-old Italian. He won the mountain stage at Tirreno Adriatico a couple of years ago, has won a stage at the Volta a Catalunya before. And TJ Van Garderen back here with Richie Porte, Andrew Talansky. At this rate, they're not going to catch Froome.
No, Froome is gone. 3Ks to go, 1.8 miles to the finish line. He has less than 10 minutes of racing to go. Unless he's asphyxiated himself with these big accelerations leading up to the steepest part of the climb with about 1.5 kilometers to go, Chris Froome will be able to pedal away from his rivals. Brilliant racing. These are the steeper slopes, but there's still a couple of very, very steep pitches within the last 2 kilometers or 1.5 miles of the bike race. Bauke Mollema putting in a big acceleration there as well.
And now he comes up to the next 2 on the road behind Froome. Again, Jean-Christophe Perrault and Johann Schaap. So Mollema is now 4th on the road. But everybody a distant second place to Chris Froome. Froome just over 1 mile to the finish, in search of his 4th win of the season and riding away from the field at Criterium International. The 82nd edition of Criterium International coming down to the final mile of racing. This is the steepest part of the final of 6 climbs on the day. TJ Van Garderen in the white jersey launching a move, and now coming around him, the overall race leader in yellow, Richie Porte. Porte dropping Van Garderen, but up ahead is Porte's teammate Chris Froome, who's leading the stage right now and threatening to ride away with the win.
Chris Froome getting very near the finish line, streaking solo. Great effort by Chris Froome, a dominating performance, but behind all kinds of drama. That is TJ Van Garderen. It's Richie Porte that's put in an attack now, and TJ trying to close the gap to the current leader of the bike race. That's Richie Porte, but great riding by TJ Van Garderen.
And now Porte comes up to the second group on the road that's behind leader Chris Froome. Van Garderen about to catch that group. But time is running out, and with the time bonuses at the finish, 10 seconds for first place, 6 for second, and 4 for third. And this man, Chris Froome, just 2 seconds behind Porte as the day started. Froome looks like he's riding away to the win, but Porte looks like he's riding into second place now.
Streaking right past the 3 men between him and his teammate Chris Froome. Team Sky, first and second on the road. Richie Porte now, he is putting in a big effort. Chris Froome will see the red kite momentarily, but Richie Porte now dropping the rest of the field as well. A command performance by Team Sky and this stage of Criterium International.
This attack by Porte coming on the steepest part of the climb. Froome through the rain. Now on the upper reaches of the climb, it'll start to level out somewhat. The gradient isn't as steep in the final 1.5 kilometers.
There's TJ Van Garderen in the white jersey with red shorts, doing the work now. Bauke Mollema is the Blanco rider in the front of this group, but TJ Van Garderen chasing down Richie Porte, starting the stage 3rd overall. Good riding by TJ Van Garderen, but unable to match the accelerations by the 2 men from Team Sky, Chris Froome and the winner of Paris-Nice just a couple of weeks ago in the yellow jersey that's behind this man, and that would be Richie Porte.
Been a long, hard day in the rain. Final of 6 climbs after 2 stages yesterday. A 90K sprint stage and an individual time trial. Froome hitting the 1K to go banner. It's just over a 1/2 mile to the finish. His teammate Richie Porte behind him now, solo second on the road.
Chris Froome's gone under the 1K to go. It flattens out with about 500 meters before the finish, but Chris Froome not waiting for Richie Porte, but Richie Porte doing a very good job now, just a few seconds behind Chris Froome. Chris Froome starting to pay for that effort that he made with 6 kilometers to go to distance himself from the leaders. Richie Porte has waited, watched the accelerations of his rivals, and now Richie Porte is free to fly. This bike race is not over. Richie Porte making a great comeback to our lone leader, and that would be Chris Froome.
And then the next group, third on the road, led by TJ Van Garderen in the white jersey as the best young rider. The leader, Chris Froome, now 26 seconds ahead of his teammate Richie Porte inside the final kilometer to the finish. Started the day 2 seconds behind Porte on the general classification.
TJ needs to stay with those riders that are with him. If he can get a little bit of a time bonus, he can stay on the podium. But this man, 500 meters to go for Chris Froome, a dominating performance here on the last climb of Criterium International. We saw him win an incredible stage in the Tour de France. It was a little bit intriguing throughout last summer's tour when he was ostensibly working for his team captain, Bradley Wiggins, but seemed to put Wiggins under a lot of trouble on all the climbs of last year's Tour de France. A great climber, Chris Froome, and now he has a chance to lead the team, and he's taking maximum advantage of that. Getting within sight now of the finish line for Chris Froome.
And how about the collective strength of Team Sky? Richie Porte winning Paris-Nice. Chris Froome, second at Tirreno Adriatico, all within the last few weeks. And now it looks like they're going to finish 1-2 in Criterium International with Chris Froome, the 27-year-old Kenyan-born British rider, maybe the best climber in the world right now, winning Criterium International for the first time.
The sign says it all, pointing to the sky in his chest, the best team in this bike race. And he will win Criterium International in 2013 and continue his great riding throughout the year. He won Oman earlier, and his teammate Richie Porte here, also on Team Sky, is going to finish second on the stage and second in the overall standings.
The only man that was better than Porte these last couple of days, his teammate Froome. So Porte gets second.
We'll see here the sprint here for third place. Mollema being led out by TJ Van Garderen. He will get some time bonus seconds, but for TJ Van Garderen, that's a solid effort, finishing just behind JC Perraud. He will wind up third in the overall standings, if my math is right. There's Andrew Talansky. Good ride by the other young American left in the remnants of this group. And Johan Chope coming in there. A solid finish for the IAM rider. Big hugs. That is a great effort by Chris Froome and both Richie Porte. They had this race well in hand.
And the big salvo fired just a few months ahead of the big race, the Tour de France, that will be back on these roads in July. And the winner of Criterium International, Chris Froome, will be one of the big favorites. Davide Malacarne in the green, John Gaudret behind him in the white for AG2R, coming across a minute and a half behind Froome's time.
Good attack by Malacarne in the finale. He did his first Tour de France last year and riding well in Criterium International, but nobody could match that man, Chris Froome. Long ways from the finish line. He dropped all of the leaders and streaked solo for a great win. Incredible ride also by Vasily Kirienka, his teammate, and Richie Porte following his rivals. Nobody could touch Team Sky. They were the magnificent team of this year's Criterium International. Maybe a portent for things to come in the Tour de France a little bit later this summer, but great ride by Chris Froome, continuing the dominance of Team Sky.
So our Stage 3 results on a big climbing day on the island of Corsica. Team Sky go 1-2 with Froome and Porte, separated by 30 seconds. TJ Van Garderen is fifth. His fellow American Andrew Talansky one spot behind him, 53 seconds down, and Maxime Bouet of AG2R rounding out the top 10. Well, and perhaps a preamble for what will happen in July. Chris Froome, huge statement today on the island of Corsica, where the Tour de France will begin this year. He wins Stage 3 and the overall at Criterium International. The Epic Cycle, presented by Michelob Ultra on NBC Sports Network, is brought to you by Michelob Ultra. This is the year you stop saying, "This is the year." By Giant Bicycles, the world leader in cycling technology and craftsmanship. And by X Endurance, the greatest athletic discovery since tennis shoes. Back in Corsica, and time now for the competitive cyclist ride of the day. And Bob, guess who?
It could be none other than the strongest man in this bike race, Chris Froome from Team Sky, demolishing the field, going from a long ways out, holding off the chasers and increasing his advantage throughout the stage. He beat his teammate by 30 seconds and the rest of the chasers by 45. Great ride by Chris Froome.
Started mountain biking in Kenya at a young age. Used to train in the highlands north of Nairobi. Didn't turn to professional road racing until the age of 22, which is late for a professional road cyclist. And now here he is 5 years later, one of the best riders in the sport.
Well, the current model for success at the Tour de France is to dominate the early season stage races, and that's what Chris Froome has been doing throughout this year's season.
On the gorgeous island of Corsica, Chris Froome leads the way in the final standings at the 82nd Criterium International. His teammate Richie Porte second, and American TJ Van Garderen completes the podium in third. Fellow American Andrew Talansky just misses out on the top five. He finishes sixth at a little more than 1 minute back. And as far as other notable names, a few other Americans, Ben King and Brent Bookwalter, and some potential Tour de France favorites, Cadel Evans and Andy Schleck, finishing way down 15 minutes or more behind that man, Chris Froome.
Signs of life from Andy Schleck. Finally, he's got a finish to a bike race. It's been a long time since he's finished a stage race. I think we have to go all the way back to last spring. So Andy Schleck starting to come around now. It'd be great to see him competitive in this summer's Tour de France.
Chris Froome off to a superb start to the 2013 season en route to this particular point right back here on the island of Corsica in July. It'll come full circle as he gets ready to lead Team Sky at the Tour de France. But for now, he'll soak in a big win at Criterium International.
Chris, that was a bit of a tactical and team masterpiece. Did things go exactly as planned this morning in the briefing?
I'd say more or less. I think we started running out of teammates naturally towards the end because they've been pulling all day. But they did a fantastic job. The guys buried themselves out there. The weather conditions were quite tough. And there were always breakaways. There was always riders in front, so the pressure was on all day. But no, it worked out really well for us, and it wasn't really my intention to attack so early on the climb. But Richie sat off my wheel a little bit, gave me a gap, and no one chased. So I just pushed on a bit, knowing that Richie would be able to stay protected behind their wheels for a while, and then he was able to attack in the final couple of kilometers himself. So no, we couldn't have asked for more today. A first and a second on the stage and the general classification. That's a really, really worthwhile exercise for us.
So Chris Froome, very calm, very poised, looking like a man who could be the top contender for the Tour de France coming up this summer. American TJ Van Garderen once again close, but unable to pull off the win, still searching for his first big professional stage race victory. He's once again the best young rider.
Yes, collecting another white jersey as best young rider. He'd be looking for the top step of the podium maybe a little bit later at the Amgen Tour of California in May. That's a big objective for TJ Van Garderen. He will still be working, as far as we know right now, for Cadel Evans in the Tour de France, but that's subject to change as we get closer to July.
Well, remember, Sunday, April 7th, the Epic Cycle Series presented by Michelob Ultra continues with live coverage of Paris-Roubaix. That's right here on the NBC Sports Network. Chris Froome stands on the top step of the podium as the winner of Criterium International. And for more, you can go to our website, NBCSports.com. For Bob Roll, I'm Steve Schlanger. Thanks for watching Criterium International here on the NBC Sports Network.